everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Death in Cambodia, Life in America. You guys know that I love bringing on different artists, directors, authors, playwrights onto this podcast. And today I have truly been looking forward to this for weeks now, ever since we had booked him. But today we have director and producer Chris Parkhurst. He is a director, producer, founder of Buran Films, and storyteller of the award-winning Elvis of Cambodia. This not only won an award at the Lowell Asian American Film Festival, but was also shown in the I'm gonna pronounce this incorrectly.
It's okay. It's Ethnography.
Ethnography. Thank you, Chris. Ethnography in Paris and the Melbourne Documentary Film in Australia Festival. It's a wonderful blend of music and history, interviews directly from Cambodian people, Sinn Sisamouth's wife, grandchildren, ministers of Cambodia, people from all over the world who continue to honor his legacy through his music today. The documentary also, I believe, gracefully blends the Khmer Rouge history with the power of the Cambodian music and the nostalgic healing properties that come with it. I am so excited and honored to have Chris Parkhurst on here. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Dorothy. You know what? I'm happy to be here, Dorothy. I know that you and I connected a few weeks ago, and I've been in and out of town, and you have as well. So it's been nice to be able to finally sort of solidify this scheduling, because I wanted to be I've just been happy to talk about the film on your podcast for a while. So it's an honor to be here, and I'm glad to be talking about the film, and I'm happy to meet you, Dorothy. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you. So Chris, why don't we start with exactly how you've become interested in Sisamouth's history and just Cambodian culture in general?
Yeah, I mean, the story, I guess, for me starts back in 2004. I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and I hadn't quite found my way into the film and TV industry yet, although I had a passion for independent filmmaking. And I was asked to go to Cambodia for 6 months to run as a sound engineer on a film that was done on a Fulbright scholarship, a film called Bomb Hunters. This was back in 2004. At the time that I was asked to go over, I had no idea what or where Cambodia was. I knew it was in Southeast Asia somewhere. I hadn't, again, worked in film, but I had a passion for it. But at that time, it was much more narrative fiction feature films. And I said yes to the opportunity. And I spent 6 months in Cambodia. And two very important things happened in my life. I fell in love with documentary filmmaking. And I fell in love with Cambodia and the Cambodian people. And I guess I've been kind of going back and forth ever since that time in 2004. So really that was sort of what sparked the interest in documentary film, number one, and then as well as really doing work over in that part of the world. And that was back in 2004. And here we are, 20 years later. And I have long since found my way into the film and TV industry, thankfully. But it really started, the humble beginnings, if you will, were back in Cambodia working on the film that I was working on there at that time.
Yeah. So many people visit Cambodia every year, and a lot of them even go over there. You yourself went there for a project that had nothing to do with Sinn Sisamouth. So there must have been something that sparked your interest, something that happened that compelled you to really focus on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways I could answer that. How did I first hear Sinn Sisamouth's music? Well, if anybody that has spent any time over there, obviously any Khmer would know this. They just, because it's in their blood, it's in their history. They're born with Sinn Sisamouth, as Rick Tipan says in our film, it's in the blood. Someone like myself, who might be visiting Cambodia, you wouldn't be there very long without hearing the music. It's impossible not to hear the music. Here we are, 50 years later, 60 years later, and everywhere you go, it's still, Sin Sisamouth, Rosarai, Sutia, Painron, it's all still being played. I remember fairly distinctly being on a trip I think we were going from Phnom Penh, and this was on the film that we were doing in 2004. And I was with my translator fixer at the time, Pon Kaizaka, who has since become a lifelong dear friend of mine. And we were on a taxi ride from Phnom Penh up to Kampong Thom. And on the way there, the taxi driver was playing some old, to me, it was like old style 60s Cambodian psychedelic rock.
Right.
And I asked Kaizaka, I was intrigued by the music, and I asked him who was singing. And he looked at me like, what do you mean? You don't know who this is? Kind of jokingly, of course. And I was like, I don't know. Who is this? This is Sinn Sisamouth. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. It's beautiful. He's like, he's the most important artist in Cambodia. And then he kind of paused for a moment. It's like trying to think what we could sort of give a comparison to, so I might have a better understanding sort of the popularity impact. And the first thing he said was, he's our Elvis. And at that instant, I was like, oh, so he's a big deal. Yeah. He's a big deal. And of course, far more, as I would learn over the years, far more of a bigger deal than I had any inkling of at the time. So that's how I first kind of heard Sinn Sisamouth's music. And I guess fast forward a few years later, I'd been in and out of Cambodia a number of times over the years, say 5-6 years go by. I've been working on smaller documentary, a commercial project in Cambodia. And sort of my interest in the music kind of grew. But it wasn't until it was 2013 when I was going back to Cambodia to work on what I thought was going to be a short film. And I was looking for ideas for this project. I went with another gentleman by the name of Jack Mateer, who's a very good friend, a director of photography. Essentially, we wanted to go to Cambodia for a month, spend 2 weeks on one another's projects. And so it was a brainstorming, 2 months before we went over. And it wasn't until just before I left to go, that I had some sort of idea what I wanted my own project, my 2 weeks to be on. Mm. And I decided through the conversations with a gentleman in Portland, Oregon, who owns a place called the Mekong Bistro. His name is Saran Kut, and he's well known in the Khmer community, certainly the diaspora on the West Coast of the U.S., mm-hmm. in particular in Portland, Oregon, where he runs his restaurant. And it was a couple of days before I was leaving, and he's playing Sinn Sisamouth, and he is not unlike every other Khmer you meet, or maybe every Khmer you meet, is a lifelong passionate Sinn Sisamouth fan. And it was through that sort of discussion that I just knew, you know what, if I want to make any sort of film about, that's not so much about Cambodia, but it felt like if there's somebody that has had such a massive impact on Cambodian culture, it's Sinn Sisamouth. And so I sort of naively agreed to Saran. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a short film about Sinn Sisamouth. And that's sort of the naive and humble beginnings of what would, of course, become a much, much more, rightfully so, substantial project.
Yeah. And at the time, did you know how much of the Khmer Rouge history and Cambodian history did you know?
I mean, I knew plenty because at that point, that's 2000, around 2013. Okay. And I'd probably spent, I don't know, all told about a year and a half total going back in, say, a 9-year period in Cambodia. So, and Cambodia had over the course of that time really become so dear to my heart. And so I guess the connection that I felt with the Cambodian people just grew and grew each time I went. And so I just surrounded myself with literature, films, music, as much as I could all the time. You have to also keep in mind when I went back in 2000, when I went in 2004, I spent 6 months, 6 out of 7 days a week, 12 to 15 hour days, intensely working on this other documentary. And then I was hired, a film called Bomb Hunters, and then I was hired to edit that film. So when I came back home, I was down in a basement immersing myself for another 6 months in nothing but Cambodian material. So you have a few years of, me going back and forth and just really delving into a lot of the history of Cambodia. And you can't, obviously, if you just do a Google search for Cambodia, it's impossible to not know of or have some inkling of what happened during the 70s, 60s, and 70s during the Khmer Rouge period. And so, So there's a point here I'd like to bring up, Dorothy, which is that something that we wanted to do early on in the course of making this film was we felt like there is plenty of material out there, whether it be film, whether it be books, whether it be poetry, whatever the medium is. It has seemed like 9 times out of 10, when people discuss Cambodia, it's about the dark period. It's about the Khmer Rouge. It's about the genocide. Understandably so. But we wanted to set out and make a film that maybe was a little bit counter to that. So, of course, you can't escape the history. And so much of what happens in our film, or anything with Cambodia in the past 50 years, 60 years, is directly connected to all of this, right? So you can't escape that. And it would have been egregious not to, it would have been impossible not to discuss it or mention it. But we really wanted to shy away from the darkness because so many other forms of art had already done that. And we wanted to really focus on something much more celebratory. And so making a film about Sin Sisamouth, or the legacy of Sin Sisamouth, we felt it in our interest and our responsibility to create something that didn't live in the mire and the muck of the Cambodian genocide, right, during the Khmer Rouge times. We wanted to create something that was much more celebratory in fashion. So yes, we couldn't ignore by any means, and we discussed directly the impact of that time during the genocide, but the film doesn't reside there. Hopefully, when people watch this film, a number of things happen, and we'll get to those, of course, Dorothy, but one of those is hopefully people feel a sense of pride and celebration in Khmer culture that sometimes may get overlooked. Like, there was an incredible amount of rich art and culture and happiness that was happening in Cambodia for a long time, well before things went the other direction.
Yeah, no, I absolutely 100% agree. You did a great job at, I think, weaving it gracefully, weaving the history in gracefully, but also not making the film feel like it was just dark and that was it.
Yeah.
The reason why I asked that question was I wonder, when you first set off and had that conversation in Portland, Oregon, before
With
saying
Saran, right? Yeah, yeah.
Saran, did you know that was the type of film that you wanted to create, that you would have to interweave history with Sisamouth, or was it just like,
no.
Okay.
No idea whatsoever.
Yeah.
It was literally, I've got 2 weeks to go do some sort of experimental film or some sort of short film. It'll be fun. We'll spend 2 weeks, around the Cambodian countryside, and we'll talk to people about, Sin Sisamouth and his music. Again, like I said at the outset, just very sort of naive, but that's part of what I love about documentary, Dorothy, is this idea. And by the way, Cambodia is a brilliant place to be able to do this. This idea of just immersing yourself amongst people and learning about subject and literally doing the research on the fly. I wouldn't really recommend this to other doc filmmakers, and I don't generally. But this film felt like at the very beginning, clearly the journey it needed to take was one of exploration. Like, I needed to discover who Sin Sisamouth was. I needed to discover the impact to Cambodian people, not only in Cambodia, but Cambodian refugees around the world. And so when Steph and I initially went to do this film, it became something much bigger after that initial 2 weeks of filming, obviously. But at the outset, I would say that I didn't have any sort of illusions of grandeur. That's for sure. I just thought I was making, 6, 7, 8 minute short film. And for me, at least, I would quickly discover that's impossible. How do you make a short film about Sin Sisamouth's legacy? Oh, man.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that documentary process. How long did it take? And at what point did you realize this is going to be a lot bigger of a topic than I thought?
Yeah. I mean, we realized it pretty quickly. Quickly meaning, we spent that initial 2 weeks filming. And then I went back home to the U.S. Stephanie, who is now my wife, went back to Malaysia, where she was working in the film industry. And I think at that point, and then Jack, our DP, went back to where he was living in the U.S. And we left it with sort of a question of, where does this go now? Because this clearly is not a short film. So if it's not a short film, was this just an exercise and nothing really comes of it? Or are you serious about making something with this? And if that's the case, then you have a lot more in front of you that needs to be done. This needs to be expanded upon. It needs to be something much bigger. And I think we knew even before we left, at least I did, what that answer was. There was no way this was going to be an exercise in doc filmmaking for a couple of weeks and then not make something of it. And so I knew when I was going to make something of it, it needed to be something much bigger. So that's 2013. By 2014, we are fully, immersed in our initial Kickstarter fund, which was to raise 20 grand. At the time, that felt like a lot of money. We would quickly learn that in a film budget, how quickly that would go, Cambodia or not. But really, once we had committed, Dorothy, towards the end of the summer of 2014, we went to Long Beach and spent 6 months with the Cambodian American population there. We sort of made Long Beach our headquarters to do a lot more filming of interviews, obviously a lot more research, and also to spread the word and awareness about what we were trying to do with the film while we took our month to run our Kickstarter campaign. And that was truly, of course, we successfully were able to get that funded. And we used that, our springboard, to get ourselves. And by the way, when I say ourselves, I mean Stephanie, myself, and our now 5-month-old boy to Cambodia for the next 6 months to go film Elvis of Cambodia. So, yeah, it was a whirlwind of a first year, to say the least, after that sort of initial idea. Well, year and a half, I'll say, after that sort of initial seeding of the 2 weeks of a short film, if you will, that became something much bigger. So at that point, a year and a half later, we find ourselves in Cambodia and we're fully immersed in our project.
Yeah.
And then we still had 9 more years to go.
Yeah. What was your process in terms of figuring out who to interview? How did you kind of go about getting all the perspectives that you needed to get?
Yeah, we often stumbled upon it. But again, it's part of the reason why I have loved doing film work in a place like Cambodia, because the Cambodian people tend to be so welcoming and have such open hearts. It's like everywhere you go, I always felt as a barang, always felt so welcomed wherever we went. It didn't matter if you had a camera or not. And so it's a sort of place where if somebody said, okay, Chris and Steph, I heard about this guy in somewhere up in Kampong Thom province. Don't know the town, don't know the village coming, but up in there in the province, there's a guy there who has a large record collection, like many, many hundreds of records. And he has kept them successfully hidden for, decades. And I won't get into too much of this because that's a big part of our story. But my example is this, like somebody said, hey, I know a guy, he's got records and he's up in a province. And at that point, in a place like Cambodia, it's practically all you need. You pack up, you go to Kampong Thom, you go to the town center of Kampong Thom, and you literally just start asking people. And it often within the hour, somebody is literally pointing you, oh yeah, go down this road, take a right, go down this road, and then you meet somebody who knows somebody about a guy who has a record. Oh yeah. And so, within like 2 hours of landing in Kampong Thom, you have found the guy they're talking about. He's showing his records. He's agreeing to be interviewed the next day. And then you spend the weekend filming with him. And then you find out an incredible story from him. And then he tells you about this person you should contact, this person you should contact. And so that happened all the time, Dorothy, all the time. Yeah. Now, that being said, let me ask you, Dorothy, if you're doing a film about Sinn Sisamouth and you're in Phnom Penh, who would you think might be the first person or people to contact about a film about Sinn Sisamouth? Out of curiosity, where does your mind go to? Okay, I'm doing a film about Sinn Sisamouth. Who should I try to find?
Yeah, I mean, think his family members or
you can stop there. You can stop right there. 100%. Got to find the family. Family. And so I should preface this with, they were one of the very first. Sin Setsochhata, the son, was one of the very first people we contacted. And so we filmed him the first time we were there during that 2 week period, during the short film stage. And then he was one of the first people, when we came back. And it was through Sin Setsochhata that obviously nothing happens. A film about Sinn Sisamouth, nothing happens without the help and ultimately the blessing of the family. Right. And obviously we became quite close over the years to all the family members, and it all really started there, and so it took conversations and kind of developing the trust. That's such a big thing with doc film, is developing the trust with your subjects. And you've seen the film. Sin Setsochhata, understandably, he and the family were definitely raising eyebrows and very suspect of these two Barong people just showing up at their doorstep saying, "Hey, we'd like to make a film about your dad and your granddad."
Yeah.
Because, the first thing they go to is like, "Oh yeah, so you want to capitalize on the legacy of my family. Great. Somebody else wants to make money on our family." And so it took some time, rightfully so, to gain the trust of the family, in particular Sin Setsochhata, because, he's had many instances over the years where, and this is a longer discussion, of course, Dorothy, but copyright is obviously a part of our film in no small part. But for years, so many people and companies have made so much money over the years from Sinn Sisamouth's music, and the family had never seen any sort of royalties in any fashion come their way. And so when you have a couple of eager-looking white filmmakers showing up at your doorstep, rightfully so, you're going to question this. What is your motivation here? So,
exactly.
But that's where it started. Bless the family, and we love them dearly, and can't wait to see them now in a couple of weeks' time when we bring the film to Cambodia. It started there. It started there. The research did, and the connections.
I was really impressed with the amount of interviews you were able to gather from all different levels. Not only, the family members, the granddaughter, people, radio hosts, people in the ministry, people who live in other countries, and really giving us the full perspective. What were some of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge, in creating the documentary?
I should have a better answer to that than I do by now, because I've been asked that many times. I think, so I'll take the easy way out just because it's what I often say. The biggest challenge truly was weaving. We like to say this film was 10 years in the making. We didn't spend 10 years making this film. I mean, it was 10 years ago that we started this film, but there have been plenty of stop and starts while we've come home, and we've had 2 kids. We've, raised our family. We've had different cycles of fundraising along the way. We've been back to Cambodia multiple times. We've lived there twice in the past 10 years, but we haven't worked on the film 10 years straight. So the most challenging process, Dorothy, really, I would say, is the weaving together of all the interviews, all the filming during these different off and on sort of over the years, these different periods off and on, and weaving that into some sort of coherent story. Because I would never make a film in this fashion again, which is to say, to not know. It's almost like a thesis. It's almost like building a thesis. What is your thesis for? What's the point you're trying to get across? In the case of filmmaking, who's your audience? What is your thesis? We didn't have any of those. And so we really found this out. I mean, you talk about the process. This was all about the process. As much as I loved it, and it was an incredible 10 years, or it's been an incredible 10 years, I wouldn't do it this way again. I would know what my film was to be about. I'd have a pretty good idea of the people that I was going to speak to. I'd kind of try to know what my arc, the story was going to be. We just didn't with this. And so the biggest challenge has been really finding what is the best way to tell and honor this story that we've been filming off and on for the past 10 years. So I think the editing, really putting together the story, the editing has been the most challenging part.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, I'm sure that there were times, Chris, within the 10 years where you thought maybe, and I could be mistaken, but I'm sure that there are times within the past 10 years where you thought maybe, do I really want to continue this? This is really taking longer than we expected, more time than we expected.
Yeah.
What kept you going to be like, no, this project is worth it?
Because that happens. As you alluded to, it happens. It happens to filmmakers all the time. Films don't get finished. I have heard, and in working in the industry, I've come across, I don't want to say stats, but conversations where it is sort of known in the industry there are more films that don't get made than get made. It's because it is such a grueling process. And I think what kept us in it, Dorothy, honestly, there weren't moments where I thought, should we move on from this or should we do something else? It was never that. It was more, God, when is this? When are we going to finish this? Like, are people, are they ever going to believe that there's going to be a documentary about Sinn Sisamouth? We've been telling people for years, is this really going to happen? And so, but really for me, what kept me in it, Dorothy, was a couple of things. I felt like at the end of the day, I always felt like I owed it to the family to see this through and to honor the stories the best way that I could, the best way that I could for the family, but also to honor Cambodia in the best way Cambodia and Cambodians in the best way that I could, because Cambodia changed my life, like Cambodians, there's nothing else to say. Cambodians, I just feel like I get choked up often when I say that, because it is such a part of my makeup now. I mean, we're going on 20 years that I've been, going in and out of Cambodia and working in that part of the world. So it was impossible. Like the thought of not finishing the film that I had set out to make in many ways to honor a country and to give back to a country that had given me so much, it felt impossible not to see it through. Yeah. It felt impossible. I had to do it. No, I should say but we, all of us, so many people connected to this film. But when I think of me personally, there was never any doubt. I knew that it would get finished. It was more, the doubts that I had were, when is this thing going to be finished? And is it going to be any good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I knew it would be good. I didn't want it to be good. I want it to be really, really good, because it's for the Cambodian people. And for me, I just wasn't going to accept anything less than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wouldn't have felt right.
I think anybody who is going to go and watch this documentary, by the way, all listeners, please do. It is so, so good. I saw right away the effort behind it. I saw right away kind of the effort behind the storytelling and the way that you wanted to do your very best to honor the family and to honor Sis's legacy. And I had never seen, as you had mentioned in the beginning of this episode, a piece of media content that really does a great job at highlighting a musician and something that is lighter than just the heaviness of the history, and ends on a note with hope. And
I hope it does.
And lightness and potential for the future, and the strength of the Cambodian culture. Music that was able to sustain. And for some of the interviews in the documentary, people who had gone through the Khmer Rouge still remembered Sisina and even thought of that music as a way of survival through the 4 years.
Right.
And coming out of that, 50 years later, here we are, people are still listening to the music. I think, and you end on that note, and I think it's honestly just, it's so different from all the types of media that I have seen around the Khmer Rouge, Cambodian people, and whatnot. So you did a great job, and I can see the passion within the art that you've created.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Thank you, Dorothy. I appreciate that. One of the things that really that was not anticipated at all, that really changed the sort of scope of the film and in the way. Okay, look, you're describing sort of this message of hope towards the end, which of course is very much how we wanted to end the film. And this idea that there's ongoing arts and culture in Cambodia and that things are happening again. And there's hope within that. To me, and for me, at the heart of that is Setsochhata, the granddaughter, because that was not foreseen by us at all. I remember meeting her in 2013, and she was really helpful, and she was really the only one that could speak. She spoke good English at that time in 2013. And so my Khmer at the time was even much worse than it is. And so we relied heavily on Kaizika, our fixer and translator, and we relied on Setsochhata to help us with the conversations with her dad. but it wasn't really noted or seen or anticipated how she would actually become a part of our film, because back in 2013, she was not seen or expected to carry on the legacy of the music at all. And in fact, it was the oldest brother who was performing and playing out with his dad. And so, I mean, both of them passed away. It's just wild. The father, Sin Setsochhata, and his eldest son both passed away during the course of our film. And so my point here was, though, it was not anticipated that the granddaughter was going to become this successful, beautiful Khmer musician in Cambodia. And it's just been brilliant to see that journey happen. And we were only able to capture it luckily, we were able to capture it just before the pandemic when we were last filming there. And that's something that just presented itself towards the very end. And for us, it's the thread that ties throughout much of this film is her voice and her hope that she brings to it. Yeah. So that was something that was not, and it happens a lot in documentary, especially ones that you don't research a ton ahead of time, where you're just kind of discovering what that story is. That's something that just presented itself actually towards the very end of our 10 years of Odyssey, really. We're thankful that it did.
And was it really then in that last thread of filming when you had you had seen the granddaughter and her growth and tied that whole in? Was that when you finally felt like, okay, this is complete, this is ready?
Yeah, I think so. It was a combination of that sort of realization that, okay, this is great. This is a thread that's going to potentially help us weave the story together, along with Ritipan and Samang Sam throughout the film. Her voice was something that we felt strongly would be able to kind of help us weave the story. And so in that way, it felt like, okay, we've completed our filming here. And I think also out of necessity, I mean, we couldn't continue. we just couldn't keep following every thread that came our way, Dorothy. At some point, we had to just say, okay, this is the final thread we're following. And then when we go back home, this is it. We have to put this together. So the timing was certainly fortuitous, I'll say.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't tell, honestly, watching it, that it was that, you had to stop there. It truly was cohesive. I loved all the different people that you had brought in. It felt very intentional, each person that you had brought in.
Yeah. How
has creating this documentary, especially dedicating 10 years of your life to it, in spurts, but still 10 years.
Yeah.
How has this documentary impacted your life?
Oh, wow. In some ways, I feel like it remains to be seen, because the film is only, just recently, just over a month ago, was the film actually released to the public worldwide. In that sense, I feel like I'm just starting to hear and see how people are responding to the film. We had our global premiere, our world premiere late last July at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. And then we brought the film to Portland. We showed it there. We showed it in Livermore, California. We went to the Lowell Asian American Film Festival in Lowell, Massachusetts. And these are all happening at kind of a couple of months in between one another. And then, like I said, we just released now streaming. The film is available at elvisofcambodia.com. And so at each of these screenings, Dorothy, I get a glimpse. I mean, more than a glimpse, because in particular at the Livermore screening, where 95% of that theater were filled with Khmers, which is that's like all I wanted. So I'm like, I want to be in a theater just filled with Cambodians watching this film. And it was there that I really started to feel, okay, this is being received well, really well. It felt very good. I'm eager to see more of that. In 2 weeks' time, I will be in Phnom Penh, and I will be bringing the film. I like to think of it like I really feel like I'm bringing the film back home.
Yeah.
And it's going to be the first time I've been back to Cambodia with the film since we were last there. It's going to be an emotional moment, to say the least. Like you probably can feel it through the internet, through Riverside. I anticipate that being pretty powerful. How that will change my life, I don't know. I mean, the film over the 10 years that's what's changed my life. This is just like the end part of it, right? It's all, that journey that's happened over the past 10 years. Steph and I have raised a family. We have 2 kids that are 8 and 10 years old. Well, the 10-year-old was 5 months when we first started this film, right? And so, we've lived abroad a couple of times with our kids. And in that way, the film definitely has changed us because we've been able to expose our kids to a world that, at least growing up, I was certainly never exposed to. So that has been a significant change in our lives. But we'll see when we bring the film to Cambodia here in a couple of weeks' time. And then, the more people see it, the more I anticipate hearing from people. And I guess we'll just see from that point.
Yeah. Was there, to this day, the most memorable response to the documentary that you have seen and received so far?
Easy. I mean, that was like, we had our showing in Melbourne, the world premiere. The lights come up at the end of the program, and I see a woman just like running down the steps towards me because I'm at the front of the stage and I'm getting ready to give a Q&A. Right. And she just runs up and there are just tears streaming down her face. And she can't speak. I'm just like, oh my God, there's a theater. Everybody is witnessing this. And I just want to hug her and I want to help her speak. But and she really couldn't speak, but she handed me a note that was in an envelope. And it was this beautiful, like she had handmade the envelope, and it was this intricate flower that she handmade that would like adorned this envelope. I was just like, and all she said was, "I want to thank you on behalf of Cambodian people. I want to thank you for what you did." And I just, I almost lost it. But and it was later that evening when I opened. Of course, we still have this. I opened that note, and it was just this. It was basically this note detailing how important it was, this film that we had created, and that she felt like I now have a connection to my father that I never had before. Because now my dad, who would listen to Sinn Sisamouth every day of his life, I heard it every day growing up. Now I know what that means. Now I know what the connection to Cambodia is. Now I know how that music bridges the gap to the Cambodia before the genocide and everything that has happened since. Yeah. And for me, that was everything. Everything. That's Dorothy, honestly, if it would have been just that one person seeing that, I was like, that's it. Job done. That's all I needed, because that's exactly what we've hoped for. Yeah. We've hoped for that. Yeah.
Would you say that was the purpose of the documentary?
Yeah, I really would. I just feel like the more that we immersed ourselves in the subject, the more time we spent with the family, the more time we just spent in Cambodia and talking with Cambodians. It felt like the bigger that it became, the more attached to the idea of creating something that could potentially, dare I say, offer some sort of a healing process. Mm-hmm. If there was any way that we could be a part of that through this film, I wanted to be a part of that. There were very lofty expectations and hopes set upon this film at a very, very early stage. I like to think that we at least got there some of the way.
Yeah. I definitely feel like you guys have achieved that through the documentary, and I am so proud. After I watched it, I was like, oh my gosh, everyone needs to go watch this, because I think it doesn't do the whole healing, but it peels back one of the onion layers.
Yes.
And sometimes all you need
is
something that just does that first step. And I think for a lot of second generation, I can relate to you when you mentioned that, a lot of second generation look to this podcast to learn about their own parents' history, to learn about different ways that they can figure out what happened to their parents because their parents never told them. A lot of people really lean on that. And so I think you were able to bring that, but from a Sin Setsochhata music perspective, and building that bridge, just like I do with my podcast, and building the bridge of history. You built the bridge of music and culture, and the reason for that, the purpose of why that season is so important.
I mean, that's brilliant, Dorothy. I'm really happy that you brought that up, because it was a big part of why I reached out to you, a month or two ago, because I felt like certainly someone like yourself would get what we were trying to do with this film. Additionally, I appreciated what you were trying to do with your podcast. So that being said, I mean, just on a personal level, I would love to hear. I don't know the very beginnings of your podcast. How and why did you set out to create Death in Cambodia? I'm curious what the early reasoning for the podcast was for you then, and if that still remains today, or if it's evolved to something else.
I think it's just exactly similar to your beginnings. I just thought that I would hit the record button, and maybe my grandkids one day would want to hear about their grandpa. And, I was always curious about my own history, because Khmer Rouge is really, really doesn't get the history time that it deserves. I feel like, we were not taught it in history books.
Right.
I didn't learn about it in my own history classes. It wasn't until I interviewed my own father that I realized how bad it was. And then it just, when I started releasing the episodes, it turned out that the rest of the Cambodian diaspora had a big question mark of what their family had lived through. And so people started, messaging me similarly to how they had responded to your movie and your documentary. Like, wow, like for the first time, I feel like I understand why my parents had raised us in the way that they did, or maybe I didn't get the kind of childhood that I had wanted or imagined in my head. You have to think, these people came to new countries with untreated PTSD, trauma from a genocide, and were left to just raise their families with ends meet.
Defend for themselves.
Defend for themselves. So you can imagine just the kind of generational trauma that can happen if the healing has not been started, if the healing process has not been started. So a lot of people have turned to the podcast, and similarly to you, as you said, it turned into something way bigger than I'm going to press the record button and we'll just do a tiny little, we'll see where this goes. Both you and I, Chris, we all started with just like, hey, let's just see where this goes. Next thing you know, we opened up a potential way to highlight Cambodia's history and start the healing process. Hopefully.
That's right. That's right, Dorothy. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm happy that the podcast exists and that you're doing this. I was very happy to discover it, because it's much needed.
At this point, Chris, what does Sin Setsochhata really mean to you? I know that you talked about the documentary and how it's impacted your life, but what does he mean to you after?
It's interesting. I don't know that I've really ever considered that. I mean, I have for many years through the course of the filmmaking, but to think now, having done the film and people are finally watching the film and seeing the work, it does make me pause to consider, what does Sinn Sisamouth and his music mean to me now? Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a really great question. I think it's mostly that I feel like I have a better appreciation now than my naive appreciation 10 years ago, certainly, about the importance of his music on many different levels in a way that I never could have grasped back then. And also, I want to say, I will never fully grasp. I'm not Cambodian. I will never, ever remotely come close to grasping what it truly means, the music really means. But it didn't stop me from making a film, of course. but I do feel like I have a much better nuanced appreciation now than I did about how his music, not only did his music survive the Khmer Rouge, but how maybe it's quite frankly more important today and more resonant to Cambodians around the world today than maybe his music had ever been before. And that's something that is astounding to me. And that is a testament to the power of Cambodian arts and culture in connecting a population that was dispersed 50 years ago. And yet there's a thread that connects every single one of you around the world through art and through music. And the power of that is undeniable. And I think that's what I think of when I think about Sinn Sisamouth's music.
And what do you hope people will learn from this documentary?
There's two very distinct audiences when you ask a question like that, right? what do I hope someone who's not Cambodian, who's never been to Cambodia, what do I hope they will learn? I hope that they will learn that there's this little area on the planet that they'd probably never thought of before, never paid any attention to, and suddenly it becomes a name for them. Oh, Cambodia. Oh, I see. That's a place where they had some incredible music. They had incredible architecture. The people seemed to smile, like the beautiful, radiant images. Like, I hope, in some small way, I hope that's what resonates with people who are not Cambodian or have not been to Cambodia, in terms of the Cambodian population, who this film is very much intended for. Right now, I feel like my biggest role in this, Dorothy, is to find people who can help me get this film seen. Because for me at this point, I feel strongly about this. Steph does, our executive producer, Patrick Feruzian. Honestly, any number of people who have worked on this film, and there's so many of us. But speaking for myself, and I think for Steph as well, it's about how can we find ways to get this into Cambodians' hands? Because if they see it, they will love it. They will love it. And it's my biggest challenge, is finding a way to get this film seen, to get people aware of it. And so coming on podcasts like yours, doing other interviews for newspapers, for radio, for social media, obviously, any and all of that helps. And I'm doing it not in a selfish way to promote our film. It's because at the heart of it, Cambodians need to see this film. It's for them. We made this film for Cambodians. It's the biggest reason this film exists. And so that is my biggest challenge now, and my biggest hope is, Dorothy, help me. Anybody who's listening to this podcast, help us get this film out, because any Cambodian who has seen this film, I think, will agree that Cambodians need to see this and they will appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I am a huge advocate. This is probably the third time that I've said it in the past hour, but I'm a huge advocate for people watching this. Chris, where can people find the film? Where can they watch it? Where can they find you?
Yeah.
I'll definitely be linking it in my podcast notes, but where would they be able to find the film?
Absolutely. So if anybody is hearing this that happens to be in Phnom Penh on the 25th of this month, we are honored to be a part of the opening gala of the Cambodian International Film Festival. So we will be playing opening night of CIFF on the 25th of June, which will be an event on the 25th. And then we're following it on the 26th with a second screening that is much more open to the general public. And so anybody that's in the area in Phnom Penh at that time, man, we'd love to. The screenings are all free. We would love to have you come down, and I'd love to meet each and every one of you. I'd love for you to see our film. Everyone else that doesn't happen to be in Phnom Penh at that moment, right now, after you hear this, you can go to elvisofcambodia.com, where the film is streaming. You can rent or you can purchase the film, so you can watch it whenever you'd like. You can purchase a rental screening. So rental streaming, I should say. Again, that's elvisofcambodia.com. And that's where I would go also to sort of keep abreast of how things are going and progress is happening with the film in terms of screenings, theatrical screenings near you, because we continue to update the calendar all the time. And so we'd love to see you at a screening. We'd love for you to see the film streaming. So thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah. Everyone go head over there. Do you have any planned screenings in the U.S. anytime soon?
Yeah, well, we just booked another one in November that's actually out towards the Livermore area. It'll be in Stockton.
Okay.
It happens I don't have the exact date, but I believe maybe it's in October. But we'll post that soon. I just spoke with a woman literally earlier last week. It's at a Delta college in Stockton.
I know exactly where that is.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're hoping for another large Cambodian event to happen like we did in Livermore. And then there are a couple of other screenings that are in the works right now, but I'd rather not say anything until they're for certain. So
until they're for certain.
Yeah, we're looking for future festivals and screenings. And then, of course, it's streaming now. It's available streaming.
Right. So if anybody also who is listening to this podcast, if anyone wants to head over to that website, they can also email you if they have interest to show this. I know that's a main goal right now.
It is. You're absolutely right, Dorothy. Thank you for bringing that up. We'd love to help anyone host a screening in their town. at their community center or wherever they may be. There, and certainly in America, there are a number of Cambodian American populations. But, in France, in Australia, anywhere where there's a Cambodian diaspora, we would love to be able to help you host a screening. So by all means, go to the website, go there for more information. There's also a contact page there that you'd be able to reach both Steph and I at. Or you can simply email me at chris@barangfilms.com. So that's Chris at BARANG films.com.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. What an amazing project you have created. I am so proud and happy that the Cambodian people and the community have this piece of media to lean on, something that highlights them and the strength of their culture, the legacy of Sin Setsochhata, and the hopeful future that I feel like we have.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Dorothy. I appreciate you having me onto the program. I love what you're doing with the podcast. Let's just keep doing what we're doing, huh?
Let's just keep doing it.
Akun Chan.
Akun.